Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell. Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What's going on, everybody? What's going on? We are here. And you know what, man? Yeah, it does seem like I am a little bit late, but hey, we're going to go ahead with this thing here with the Boxing Source podcast because you know what? We all know that this game that people have been watching is over, okay? You know what? It would be like an absolute super duper miracle of sorts if that one team was able to come back in this game, but you just seen an absolutely dominant performance so far from a defense there of the Seattle Seahawks. So I'm like, you know what, man, this thing is over, dog. It's done. It's a wrap. It's done. All right. So wanted to, go ahead and have this thing here with the Boxing Source podcast and everything that's been going on over the past week. I mean, we did have a world title fight that did take place over in Liverpool, England. We're going to be talking about that here in this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. We had, man, yet another world title change hands. Man, we ain't even really been, 5 weeks in or so in 2026, and we already have another world champion. All right. I mean, we had all the stuff that went down last weekend. We had titles changing hands last weekend. Now we go into this weekend, and what? Hey, we had another world title change hands. You know what I mean? When you had the bout for the WBA Featherweight Championship, Nick Ball versus Brandon Figueroa over there in Liverpool, right? And Nick Ball was going in there as the world champion there, the WBA featherweight champion, with a record of 23 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. We had, of course, a number of things where he was battling guys like Isaac Dogbe, of course, former champion. Ray Vargas, of course, had the draw against Ray Vargas, had the win against Raymond Ford, which was contested also there. But then, a few fights here with the defenses of that WBA title before getting in this bout here against Brandon Figueroa. Of course, Brandon Figueroa there is the heartbreaker, not the heartbreak kid. I'll say it again, not the heartbreak kid. It's the heartbreaker. All right? He ain't no Shawn Michaels. He ain't doing that. All right? So, with that being said, Brandon Figueroa, of course, had the world titles there in the super bantamweight division, right? And then went up to the featherweight division and had been, holding the world featherweight championship there, as he had been elevated of sorts, basically there, but only had that one bout against Stephen Fulton where he was just outpointed, outclassed, and everything like that in the rematch. He had lost to Stephen Fulton twice. Then he fought, Joey Gonzalez, who, according to a number of people, feel like, Joey Gonzalez is able to get big fights within these divisions, and we have no idea how he's able to get these big fights. But he did have a good showing there against Brandon Figueroa, but Figueroa was able to get a unanimous decision win over Joey Gonzalez. So here against Nick Ball, hey, man, I was leaning towards Nick Ball in this particular bout. Had him actually, I thought Nick Ball was going to be able to get a stoppage because from the performance that Brandon Figueroa had against Stephen Fulton, I really didn't think that he would have, much there, in order for him to, have a good bout against Nick Ball, right? But what we saw in this bout here in Liverpool was a pretty good action fight there where you saw Brandon Figueroa basically being Brandon Figueroa as far as like his level of activity there over the course of those rounds. Now, within the first couple of rounds, you did have that activity there from Brandon Figueroa, of course, throwing punches, trying to connect there, using his height there as he's at like 5'9", while you got Nick Ball, who's there, of course, at like 5'2". I mean, come on, man. You got a guy there as a featherweight champion, and he's there at 5'2", right? But with Brandon Figueroa, he was able to utilize his height and reach for a lot of that time. With Nick Ball, he's pretty much like, as he said, wrecking ball, but He's short, compact, very sharp with his punches. You know what I mean? As far as like when he does get within the range to land, because of course, at the end of the day, he's still 5'2", right? So with that, you kind of seen some good work from Brandon Figueroa early, but with Nick Ball, once he's able to get within range, he could, land those short, compact shots. And within those first few rounds, particularly in the first and the second round, you did see Nick Ball kind of land the uppercut there on to Brandon Figueroa there pretty early. And I thought that was, key there, of course, with Nick Ball being there at Orthodox and with Brandon Figueroa kind of like switching stances from Orthodox and Southpaw, right? So I was thinking that Nick Ball, having these instances where he was landing these, I would say, power shots, so to speak, that looked like they were more definitive than Brandon Figueroa, that it could, get him to get a little bit of an advantage while the rounds went on. But Brandon Figueroa was just a more active fighter over the course of those rounds. I thought that he was, able to outwork him, not just the thing there with the distance, but on the inside. You kind of like seen that. Like with Nick Ball, I thought, he would kind of like be in there almost like, how Isaac Pitbull Cruz is. You got somebody else that's around like, 5'4", 5'4" or something like that. But with Isaac Cruz, he ain't really going to be, there to kind of really box you. He's going to try to get within the inside and work you, rough you up a little bit, land big, power shots, but it'll pretty much be in close quarters. With Nick Ball, it was looking like Nick Ball was the one that kind of like fought like a boxer, short, sharp shots, but like not very many like combinations. Like you would see like a 1-2, but it almost was like he would do one punch at a time, like one, and then follow up with a two. It's not like 1-2, like, pretty quickly, like you see with the number of combinations. But he would just try to see if he could, as they say sometimes, score points in that he would just try to make it to where he's landing the shot, any shot, and make sure that it would be like definitive enough there. But, that wouldn't necessarily get to Brandon Figueroa over the course of those rounds. Now, by the time we got within like midway through the fight, you seen the amount of punches landed on Nick Ball kind of like got to him a little bit. You did see some blood coming from the nose there of Nick Ball, but he was still game. He was still in his, I would say, element. Still boxing, still trying to box in on the inside, try to get within range of Brandon Figueroa. But, props to Figueroa. He was, able to, I would say, like take a number of those power shots that were landed by Nick Ball, I would say within the first half of the fight. Now, you would kind of like say that it would be a little bit close between those two fighters over the course of those rounds, right? But the work rate of Brandon Figueroa kind of like was key here in this particular bout, right? So, going into those last couple of rounds, round 10, round 11, before you go into round 12, that, some people may say that it would be a little bit close, but, at least from the scorecards, a couple of the scorecards, they said that one fighter had a significant advantage of sorts there within 11 rounds or so. But we'll get into that here a little bit. But you just didn't really see something where, hey, maybe Nick Ball would have something to have Brandon Figueroa in trouble here in this bout. Because once I seen those uppercuts landing early in the fight there from Nick Ball, and Brandon Figueroa was able to, just shrug him off or shake him off and still, do what he does there in the ring because he's known for, his level of activity there with his hands. Then he just went through each of these rounds doing what he needed to do. Now, of course, you did have Manny Robles there in the corner of Brandon Figueroa, and he was like, pressing Brandon Figueroa, saying that, hey, maybe you have to, up the pressure, up, what's going on with the activity, because you never know, with the judges' scorecards, with it being over there in England, that they may lean towards the hometown fighter or fighter that's within his home country. So he wanted to make it known that you might have to do a little bit extra here in order for you to get the win at this sense, right? So for me, I would say like within those last couple of rounds, still had it to where both fighters kind of had their moments, so to speak. Um, did it look like it would be close? Maybe, but how would I put it? Um, in comparison to what we saw with Ray Mordecai and Andy Cruz, like that particular fight, you've seen like a number of those rounds be very close, and a number of those rounds where you had like a good amount of action between both of those fighters, or had some moments like within 1 minute, or and then another minute another fighter has something. Here it was more about free flowing, and that you kind of like seen a little bit from each fighter, but it looked like it was kind of controlled by what Brandon Figueroa was doing. And I think that, the judges at the end of the day, oh, it's just looking at the thing there. We still got what's going on with the football game. I mean, it might be over now for reals. But, you had what was going on there with Brandon Figueroa Jr., right? And he was still active with his hands. He still, made it to where it's like, okay, I'm throwing 3, 4, 5 punches at a time, in comparison to maybe like 2 from Nick Ball, right? And the thing with Nick Ball, as was mentioned earlier, it was more about him being either like a counter puncher, or just throwing like 1 or 2 punches at a time and trying to be as precise as possible with those punches, because as I mentioned, he's there at like 5'2". At the end of the day, come on, like 5'2", right? You'll probably see that at like what, I don't know, like a super flyweight or something. I don't even know, what I'm saying? Like maybe you even see super flyweights that might be, taller than Nick Ball in that sense. But hey, he was able to defend, the WBA belt, for some time, there before this bout here against Brandon Figueroa. So, kind of like go to what we had there in those last couple of rounds. And then you kind of like seeing that maybe, live, that the fight is in the balance, fights up in the air. You may not know who will be able to have the advantage in the fight going into the 12th round, right? And then here you go, you're about a couple of seconds in. They both, try to, scrap it out. And then, hey, props to Brandon Figueroa. He was able to land that shot. Boom! Was able to connect and catch Nick Ball before Nick Ball could land. And then, hey, it could have been, hey, the fight could have been over right there, man, because sometimes when you see a fighter that lands like face first on the canvas like that, hey, sometimes the referees don't even continue to count. But, referee here in this particular bout here, Steve Gray did give Nick Ball a count. Nick Ball was able to get up, right? Now, he was a little bit hurt there in that one, of course, because he got clocked. I mean, come on. At the end of the day, he got clocked, right? Then, after, the count took place, Brandon Figueroa got to, Nick Ball, throwing combinations here and there. And, Nick Ball, I mean, he was there on the ropes, and, he tried to, lean on the ropes and lean down on the ropes or whatever it is. But I'm gonna be real with y'all. Hey, Nick Ball should have been a little bit taller. I'm gonna just say that. Hey, because I don't know if he would have slipped through the ropes like that if he was like 5'5", or I don't even know, like 5'6" or something. Because when he ducked down, it was like he went through the gap there in between the ropes. Okay, so it wasn't like he could slip and then lean on the ropes or anything like that. When he tried to do that, he just slipped through the whole rope and went outside the ring a little bit right there, right? So, the referee resumed the count again. Okay, and I don't know, pretty much was like 4 or 5, and then you just ended up waving the count, and now you have a new champion there in the featherweight division in Brandon Figueroa. Okay, and he was able to hand Nick Ball his first loss of his pro career. Now, with Brandon Figueroa going into this bout as not only the number one ranked contender, but you say the mandatory challenger to that WBA title. That's it. That's all. There's no rematch. Okay. So now you got Brandon Figueroa there as the WBA featherweight champion. His record is now there at 27 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw. That is his 20th knockout victory there. And hey, the heartbreaker, I guess, broke the hearts of a number of fighters. I mean, a number of fans out there in Liverpool, man. So, good job by Brandon Figueroa for him to get the WBA featherweight championship. And yes, last weekend we did have a newly crowned champion with the WBC in Bruce Carrington, right? So you're gonna have like a pretty good, pretty diverse division, out there within the featherweight joint, right? Because you got Brandon Figueroa now as a world champion. You got Nick Ball, of course, is now the former world champion. Bruce Carrington, who had been waiting for the opportunity to become a world champion, now is a WBC champ, right? And you do have the long standing world champion there in the WBO with Rafael Espinoza, and you also have Angelo Leo there with the IBF belt. So you got all of those fighters there that I named. You got Mirko Cuello, that's there as an interim champion there for the WBA. You got, of course, Elijah Pierce, who I've talked with a number of times here over the past couple of years. Now in a WBO eliminator bout that's coming up here later this month. That'll be in New York, right? So we got a lot of activity that's going to be taking place, there within the featherweight division with whatever we had already, right? But with Brandon Figueroa, of course, getting this world championship win, he is now a what I would say a 3-time champion. Of course, he was a WBC interim champion, and then kind of like went up with that and all that stuff, right? But now he was able to win this bout here against Nick Ball to become the WBA featherweight champion, right? Now, this is a crushing defeat here for Nick Ball because, I mean, you got Nick Ball that had those multiple defenses thereof the WBA title, had the wins over Ronnie Rios, TJ Doheny, and the latest one against Sam Goodman last year, right? But even with that being said, you have to see like how he'll be able to bounce back from this because, as I mentioned before, with Figueroa being the mandatory challenger, it means you can't necessarily get a rematch. Now, thing is with Nick Ball, maybe they had some good numbers in reference to this particular bout. Remember, this was like what was it? 2 of his last 3 bouts had basically been in this same arena before this loss against Brandon Figueroa. Actually, he's had the bouts in Riyadh and the bouts over in Echo Arena in Liverpool. So they kind of like say that, hey, we're building a rapport there with Nick Ball, having that crowd over there in Liverpool. So maybe he could get, another opportunity to get back in the mix there in the featherweight division and then have another chance at a world title. But this one right here, going into the last round, just getting caught with that shot there early in the 12th round. And, it just, was tough for him there on that sense. Now, when it came to, the scorecards going into the 12th round, right? What you had there was you had 2 judges had it 106, 103 in favor of Brandon Figueroa, and then 1 judge had it 107, 102 in favor of Nick Ball. So that basically like decided the whole fight right there. Like the fight was done before the 12th round. unless if you had like a result like that, like a knockout or a TKO in the 12th round, if it went that was full 3 minutes, then you would have had a split decision in favor of Brandon Figueroa because he had so many rounds there in his favor, right? But hey, he wanted to finish it definitively. His coach there, shout out to Manny Robles, he said that hey, you can't necessarily leave it to chance out there, and that's what he did. And they had something there where they were talking with Manny Robles, after the fight. This it was through Boxing News, and he basically was saying like, hey, I didn't know like how the fight was going to be there in the going into the 12th round, and then he said like by the time he was getting settled into his spot where he was there on the corner, then he noticed like his 2 seconds, and the folks with him were saying that hey, Brandon Figueroa scored the knockdown, so he's like, oh okay, yeah, hey, this is what we got, this is what we needed, and then ultimately having a finish there, they were all excited and all that type of stuff there because now Brandon Figueroa was able to get the job done and become the world champion. Okay, about the whole thing that happened immediately after the fight. They were celebrating, and that pretty much like happens there in these bouts, especially bouts of that magnitude there. But at the end of the whole thing, you did have that moment where what was it? Andrew Cain, I guess he like kicked one of the guys there that was on the team for Brandon Figueroa. That was kind of funny right there. But still at the end of the whole thing, it was like, hey, they just wanted to celebrate Brandon Figueroa becoming a world champion once again. So you had the whole thing with Andrew Cain there after the fight. Some of the fans, throwing drinks in the ring and all that type of stuff. But, at the end of the whole thing, man, Figueroa was able to get the job done. Right. So Figueroa, as I mentioned, now new WBA featherweight champion. And you have all the fighters that I mentioned as far as like having the world championships, top contenders, they're at the 126-pound division. Now, as far as like, hey, what is going to be going on outside of that, I don't know, because I know some people that kind of like mentioned that there may be like a featherweight tournament of sorts. I mean, I don't know about that. They probably should have just jumped it off, from this point here in 2026, because we don't know. Like for me personally, I don't know what the status is for like a Rafael Espinoza being a WBO champion, and him kind of having a what is it like a little bit of a limbo thing when it comes to when his next fight could take place. You know, some could say the same thing about what Angelo Leo. He hasn't fought since May of last year against Tomoki Kameda. Okay, he had the win, of course, the knockout win against Luis Alberto Lopez, and then had one defense of that IBF title. So after that, you haven't really seen much from Angelo Leo. I mean, we could have it to the point where he may end up fighting the top-rated contender in Raif Salim. But then it's like, okay, if they do order that, the IBF, where are they gonna have it at? Who's gonna host it? All that type of stuff. You don't know. So that's like one of the things there that you gotta, kind of like see here when it comes to like a number of these world champions and what their situation is as far as like getting fights or setting fights up. I mean, I kind of like talked about this last weekend when it came to the whole instance with like Xander Zayas, for example, or a number of the fighters that were on that card because they were under Top Rank. And we all know about the whole thing with Top Rank, that as of right now, they still don't have like a network deal or distribution deal or any type of thing there to kind of like have full fight cards that they could do and showcase their fighters. So you have the same thing here with the number of these folks that do have world championships. You don't know where they're going to end up because no TV deal. Pretty much like said the same thing in reference to what Bakr Murtazali have held the IBF belt at 154 before having a fight against Josh Kelly. no TV deal on the main event, so you weren't going to necessarily see him fight unless it ended up being like a purse bid. So that's what you have on that front. So, I would say there with Brandon Figueroa, now we got to see like where he kind of like sorts himself out here in the featherweight division. Hopefully I can get in contact with, I don't know if it would be like Figueroa, but maybe Manny Robles here once he gets back from the UK. He's gonna be there, settled in once he gets back to the U.S. and then back in the gym, back at it. So we'll see how that goes there. But as I mentioned there with Nick Ball, that's a really really tough loss for him. Doesn't get that opportunity to get the world world title back in a rematch, so to speak, whatever, right? So now he will have to, basically climb his way back to world title contention. This is not much different than, what happened last month over in New York City. Dalton Smith, mandatory challenger to Subriel Matias, was able to get the knockout win. Subriel Matias got to, go back, from the drawing board. So same thing here with Nick Ball. You know what I mean? Shout out to Champion Win in the building here, checking in and all that here, right? Now, that was, mainly what we got from the action there last week. I know I did talk about one fighter that was involved at the end of this bout between Ball and Figueroa and Andrew Cain there, who, was a fighter that did kind of have a really interesting bout of sorts, to say the least. There in this fight card. He's also from Liverpool. He did have a fight against Alejandro Gonzalez there, and it was a final eliminator bout there, and it was something that they both, scrapped it out, and they had it where, Andrew Cain had been knocked down twice in the 8th round. Okay. One was basically there at the end of the 8th round. Okay. But then, he was able to get back into it. Got, Alejandro Gonzalez there in the 9th round, was able to score one knockdown. Then, Gonzalez got up. Then you had Andrew Cain, blitz him again. And then Alejandro Gonzalez, went down again. And then once he got up for the second time, the referee ended up waving about, giving the win for Andrew Cain. Now that is for a WBC final eliminator there in the bantamweight division. So you're gonna have, Andrew Cain be next in line there for the WBC bantamweight title. Now you do have Juan Francisco Estrada versus, I think it's supposed to be Tenshin Nasukawa there for the vacant WBC title. Okay. That's going to be interesting, of course, given that Juan Francisco Estrada, of course, has been a long standing fighter there within like 115 and all of that. Now he has the opportunity to get that bantamweight title, vacant bantamweight title, of course, vacated by Junto Nakatani. And you have Tenshin Nasukawa there, of course, who, had been, building the name, of course, from his, kickboxing days, and then was able to build up a record there in boxing, before having his loss to Kuma Inoue, right? But I guess now they have it where Inoue ended up vacating it again, and that's crazy work. You know what I mean? But now you have Andrew Cain that's going to be next in line for the winner of that particular bout. Shout out Champion. He says maybe Top Rank needs an app or something like that. I don't, man. They might have to see if they could get in on the DAZN, right? Because you have Matchroom that's there, with it. You had Queensbury that had the deal with the DAZN from last year, right? Now I know the thing is with the DAZN, they don't necessarily have the the customers here on the U.S. market, but at the same time, the thing is, you don't know where they could kind of like go at this point. It's almost like you utilize all your options, unless if you like say have a deal with Fox Sports or something like that. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, they had like bad ratings all around, through ESPN. It was just that, the person that was kind of working the TV deal or the network deal with ESPN screwed up the. You know what? I ain't even going to go into that too much, right? But we see what's going on with the Top Rank Classics channel. You did see last weekend that the fight card that was in Puerto Rico, headlined by Xander Zayas and Abbas Barao, was on the Top Rank Classics channel. So I don't know. Maybe they have something with that until they work out a deal with, I don't know, Fox Sports or maybe Netflix or something. But outside of that, it's the zone, because I don't see him like working out something with like a Amazon Prime or anything like that. I just don't. So real tough situation there when it comes to these I would say American based promoters and having deals within these networks or distribution or something like that. Because of course, talk about the thing there with Top Rank. Golden Boy wasn't able to renew or fully renew with DAZN at the end of last year. They did have one event through DAZN this year, but outside of that, they really don't have anything in place at the moment. So makes for the American boxing market look really, really, really tough there, because outside of what Matchroom has and what as I said, Queensberry has, you don't really have much in the American market where you could have fights or fight cards on a consistent basis that would be covered on any type of network. No matter what you could name, just kind of like going right there. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, very tough, man. Very tough. So I don't know how that's gonna, work itself out on that front. We'll have to see, how that goes on that. But it'll be something. Like I said, it's going to be a very interesting year for the sport of boxing when it comes to overall coverage. Because outside of what you may see with, they say, for example, with Ring Magazine, Turkey Al Sheikh, Shayla. Other than that, not sure. You may have Matchroom. Matchroom will have their, what they do, but other than that, nah. I'll give you an example. Let's see, right? So here's one, right? You got, what is it supposed to be? A unification bout that's supposed to be on slate for this month in the super featherweight division with Manuel Navarrete versus Eduardo Sugar Nunez. That's on Matchroom Boxing. Remember the fight that you had between Ray Murtaya and Andy Cruz? That was on Matchroom Boxing. Remember, Ray Murtaya, Emmanuel Navarrete, they're both under Top Rank. But here you got both of those guys fighting Matchroom fighters, and they're basically under Matchroom Boxing. So until you had the whole thing sorted out with Top Rank, you might see a lot of these guys either going on fight cards on Matchroom Boxing or on these whole things with like Sayla or whatever it is, or you might see them in like smaller fight cards. Like I know about a Top Rank signee that's been under Top Rank here for the past couple of fights, has another one coming up here February 21st. It's going to be on under the same promotional company that he was on for his last bout here over in Hanover, Maryland. So you kind of like seeing that more and more here with Top Rank signees, right? If not, then fighters might have to wait it out until their contract like expires. And if so, then some might have to wait a good little minute, unless if they could work out a deal to, get out of the contract. But it's a, really, really tough situation on that front. All right. So, what was the next thing that I was going to be talking about here real quick? It was, thing with Errol Spence, or I'm going to go over the whole lawsuit with Floyd Mayweather. Let's just talk about the Errol Spence joint here. All right. All right. Errol Spence Jr., of course, still talked about. He had his last bout in, of course, 2023 against George Crawford. Hasn't been in the ring since. Okay. Some thought that he would get back in the ring against Sebastian Fundora sometime back after Fundora had his first win over Tim Tszyu. Didn't happen. Some thought that he would be able to get back in the ring. I would guess, I would say last year, maybe against Sebastian Fundora, maybe against a Virgil Ortiz. Some people bringing up Virgil Ortiz last year. They brought him up this year, but that didn't necessarily happen. Latest thing is that he could be rumored to be facing Tim Tszyu, and that has had a little bit of traction over the past week or so. But as of right now, we haven't really seen much nothing on that. Now he had been in the gym over in Texas here recently. He was chopping it up with Roy Jones Jr., a few other folks out there within what was going on with that event. You did have some people there, some media members, folks from Fight Hype that was there. He was able to talk with Errol Spence Jr. for a little bit. And one of the things that they did bring up was the instance of former undisputed champion of 154 pounds, Jermell Charlo, saying that he would want an opportunity to face Errol Spence Jr. And Errol Spence Jr. made a comment like, man, you know what, man? I don't know why you're doing it, man, because now you got Crawford retired, a couple of other folks that ain't really doing much, and that I would kind of garner a lot of interest. So it's mainly about the money and everything like that. So he's kind of dismissing it at this point. Um, I've seen some things where Spence could have potentially be working with some trainers out there. Someone brought up Stephen Breadman Edwards, and shout out to Breadman. He kind of dismissed it a little bit there on social media, but you kind of still see the amount of interest that boxing fans have when it comes to Errol Spence Jr. Like I said, it's been a very extended layoff there for Errol Spence, but hey, you did have Keith Thurman return to the ring after a long time, right? You did have, as some people say, my brother uh, Gary Russell Jr. get back in the ring after an extended period of time, right? So it was, so it would be something to see if Errol Spence Jr. is able to get back in the ring. As I mentioned there with Errol Spence Jr. Excuse me, not Errol Spence Jr., but with Gary Russell Jr. He had a bout last year in July. His previous bout was in December of 2022. Okay. So you had that extended type of layoff or whatever it is for a number of these fighters, right? But given that they're still able to get back in the ring, they still, are able to have a fight or two or whatever it is, right? Hey, remember, Keith Thurman was trying to get in the mix there with Tim Tszyu initially, right? But didn't necessarily happen. Then they tried to get, rekindle that. Didn't necessarily happen, you know what I'm saying? So, hey, him having a bout that he had, talking about Thurman, there against Brock Jarvis last year. Then he was supposed to have the fight here against Sebastian Fundora in October or late October of last year, but hand injury for Sebastian Fundora. Now it's scheduled for late March. And I also thought that was interesting when it came to people talking about Errol Spence Jr. Someone brought up that fight between Sebastian Fundora and Keith Thurman, and of course, he said hey, you was chasing Keith Thurman for some time, and I think Errol Spence said something to the extent of, "Man, I ain't find no Keith Thurman, man." That was kind of funny, man. That was kind of funny. He's after all these years, he's still nah, man. Don't be talking about Keith Thurman, man. You know what I'm saying? That's funny though. Shout out to Marta Prince in the building, checking in and on that. Canton here, it says, what do you think about John Real Casimiro? Because many of his fans should be on he should be on the top 10 pound for pound today. I don't know. There might be some folks on social media talking about John Real Casimiro, but yeah, I don't know like what his standing is. Like seriously, because I thought he would have been floating around as a contender, but yeah, he's kind of been in and out of the mix there, as far as like being a contender or whatever it is. But remember, last year he did have a loss by decision against Kayanosuke Kameda. Props to him, he was able to get back in the ring within like a couple months. Like he had another fight within 2 months of that loss to Kameda, and you gotta win. So he's kind of like been floating around there within the super bantamweight division. Now they're in the featherweight division. So I have to see like what they are kind of like having him here within this particular point. So I don't know, he might have to run it back with Kameda or something, to kind of like get in the mix there at 126 if he's solidified there at 126. All right, so there you go, right? Thoughts on the rumored Yoenli Hernandez versus Jahi Tucker fight? I saw that. I saw that. Man, I was like, hey, if they said that this was going to be happening, I was like, ooh, ooh, because Yoenli Hernandez. Let me tell you something. And then, Yoenli Hernandez is a problem, an absolute problem. You know what I mean? What was it? I was out there for what was it when he fought February 1st of last year, right? Um, he had that fight against Angel Ruiz on that one, and then after that, he had the fight against Kyron Davis, right? And he just, pretty much like beat up and schooled Kyron Davis. That was just that was just bad, right? Then he had another fight over in not Hollywood, California, but Hollywood, Florida. I could have there was like I was over there in the Miami area during that weekend, but I was out there doing some other stuff, so I didn't quite make it for that particular fight. Okay, but that was just like a one round, just get in there, get in the ring, get some work, and that's it. But if he goes in here against the High Tucker man, man, ooh, yeah, that wouldn't be necessarily good. It wouldn't be good, man. I did see, Jahad Tucker there against Lorenzo Truck Simpson last year. I've had a conversation with Truck since then. Um, Man, I don't know, man, because you're talking about Jahad Tucker. That's kind of like, when he was coming up there within the top rank at the time, like some years ago, right? They were trying to, or at least he was trying to be the guy at the time at 154 that wanted smoke with Xander Zayas. But then he had a little bit of an incident where I think he had a fight schedule and he ended up missing weight, right? And then after that, it was almost like they kind of like tried to write him off, and how they had like a top rank specialist, something like that, where if you kind of cross them a little bit, or if you do something that ain't really in line with what they trying to do, then they'll maneuver you in certain ways to kind of like get you out of the pain. Now, all promotional companies kind of do this in a sense, but you kind of like seen it with Jahad Tucker at one point. They thought that they would have like done it against when he fought what was his name, Sheknius Vili, right? And then he had the fight against Nicholas Floss there in 2023, and then the whole thing with Francisco Verone, and then you had the other bout with Quincy Lavalier, who like at the time was like having a string of good wins. You know what I mean? There, I guess within like another country. So they were trying to see about Jahad Tucker and see where he would be at, but he just kept winning and kept winning, and he's done that since then. But now they having they having Jahad Tucker going up against Yoenli Hernandez, man. And remember, like Jahad Tucker is there at like 23. against Hernandez. Nah, that's. I'm sorry, but that could be barbecue chicken alert. That could be barbecue chicken alert. I'm just being real, just being as you know as real as I could get on that one. That could be barbecue chicken alert. All right. So yeah, you do have that. That could be on there. I'm also interested to see who else is going to be on the March 28th card because that particular fight could be on the March 28th card there with Sebastian Findor and Keith Thurman. Um, so hopefully within these next couple of weeks, we do see who would be on that fight card there for Las Vegas MGM Grand Garden Arena. There, Sebastian Findor versus Keith Thurman for the WBC 154-pound title. All right. So that was another thing there that I was going to talk about. What else? All right. I need to see about getting this particular document on here because another one of those big stories that was going on over the course of the week was the post of Floyd Floyd J. Mayweather. I was going to say his full name. I don't necessarily do that for Mayweather though. I don't. Floyd Mayweather putting up the lawsuit against Showtime, Showtime Sports, basically, and Stephen Espinoza. Now, there's actually more people involved with it, but they only have Stephen Espinoza as an actual name that is on this lawsuit, right? So I just wanted to see about this whole thing because it was like a pretty big story, so to speak, with the number of people that had some names that they thought would be tied to it, but they ain't necessarily on there yet or aren't there at all. But we're gonna kind of like go through a couple of things there with this particular lawsuit because, of course, there's a lot of money that is tied to this. Okay. So what I was going to do is, yeah, let's see. I will have this thing posted on here, right? Um, Now this is, of course, through the live here, for those that are like watching and everything like that. So, yeah, you got the whole thing. Yeah, you talking about, yeah, yeah. I ain't doing no free trial. My fault. All right, all right. So I mean, y'all see it on the screen for those that are watching here live, whether it's YouTube or Rumble, right? Um, you do see Floyd Mayweather there as a plaintiff, and this is against Showtime Networks and Stephen Espinoza, and it says those 1 to 100 inclusive. Now, I don't know if it's like another 100 people that's going to be part of this lawsuit, but I do see that this is like pretty interesting there. So I wanted to kind of like go through a couple of things in reference to this. Like I'll talk about the introduction, so to speak, and first couple of things there with the introduction, right? There it says, like, the action seeks to recover hundreds of millions of dollars in misappropriated funds and damages resulted from a long running and elaborate scheme of financial fraud, breaches of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy orchestrated by Floyd Mayweather's former manager and advisor, Al Heyman, with the knowing and substantial participation and aid of defendants, Showtime Networks, and Stephen Espinoza, among others. Says that Mayweather was systematically deprived of a significant portion of his career earnings, at least $340 million through a complex web of hidden accounts, unauthorized transactions, and deliberate concealment of financial records. Now that in itself is just, wow, right? Now, I was just going to go through number two. Defendant Showtime and Espinoza, who was then the president of Showtime Sports, played a critical role in facilitating this misconduct. It is alleged that they diverted funds intended for Mayweather into accounts controlled by Heyman or his agents, claimed that critical financial records for Mayweather's biggest fights were, quote, lost, unquote, or inaccessible, and failed to provide transparency despite clear contractual obligations for repeated requests for accounting. By wiring fight proceeds to accounts not directly accessible by Mayweather, and by later asserting defenses like the statute of limitations while key documents were missing. Showtime and Espinoza enabled Heyman's scheme and stymied Mayweather's efforts to uncover the truth. So that is like basically part of the introduction to this. And when you kind of like go into the details of this, you do have some people that are involved with it, including Al Heyman. They did have a person there by the name of Jeff Morris, who is an accountant and tax attorney that was, engaged to handle Mayweather's tax and accounting managers and is a signatory or controller on several bank accounts where Mayweather's fight earnings had been deposited. Okay, so what is like basically saying in most of this, right? And this kind of like was kind of like detailed here. It goes over the history between Floyd Mayweather and Al Heyman. But one of the things that kind of like stood out was that they said when it came to the fights, particularly the fight that took place between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao or something like that, right? That the funds that were from that particular fight, like say for example, the fight purse, you know what I mean? So you could have a fight purse, and then you could have something that was signed off to where, hey, the fighter gets this amount of money off a rip, right? So apparently, instead of MGM or Showtime or whatever it is sending that fight purse over to Mayweather directly, it was sent off to another account that Mayweather doesn't have access to, doesn't have control over, or anything like that. You know, but they're supposed to have some type of agreement there when it came to Floyd Mayweather and Al Heyman. If you still see this here on the screen for those watching, it says that usually you have the whole thing with the manager's fee where manager and advisor would take a 10% fee, from a fight earnings, and the fighter would keep 90%. Now, they said it was different than usually what managers kind of like charge, which is like often 33%. Of course, like the whole thing with the purse splits and how promoters and managers get like a significant amount of money from it is crazy work. But it has something where a manager gets like 10% in comparison to 30 or 33%. Of course, that's going to be, really, really good, right? Now, they did have, of course, have that relationship over the years and everything like that. But, the thing about it is that they kind of said that, like here, it shows like banking records show a pattern of large transfers from the accounts to Allen Heyman Development Incorporated and other Heyman owned entities. These transfers were often labeled as repayment or loan payoff, falsely suggesting that Heyman had advanced money to Mayweather at some earlier time, which was now being reimbursed. Mayweather insists that he never received such loans from Heyman. That's kind of key right there, right? Because some people kind of like say like, hey, this kind of dealing happens in the sport. Just being real. Shout out to G5 Jeff in the building. Yeah, I'm here live now. I thought I'll be able to just have a little bit of a live here, but it's like at this time. Usually it's around like 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. But we all know what happened there in the football game. Hey, shout out to the Seattle Seahawks dominant performance. There over the course of those 4 quarters. All right. But now you see, I'm kind of like going through the whole document there, that you were able to check out here earlier today. So yeah, I did read like the 25 pages, but I'm kind of like going over a couple of the details here, right? All right, so let's go through like number 21 of the list here. Like records show numerous one-off payments from Mayweather's accounts directly to Heyman or Morris, who was named earlier. It includes transactions on dates unconnected to any fight with memos like, quote, Mayweather expenses, unquote, or no clear description and amounts such as 12 million, 15 million, 3 million, 9 million, etc. Each of these represents Mayweather's money being paid out without his authorization or benefit. Mayweather never approved paying Heyman such bonuses or fees beyond the agreed 10%, and certainly not paying his accountant, Morris, multi-million dollar sums. If they occurred, they were clear misappropriations. So remember, looked like they had like an agreement there as far as like a manager slash advisor agreement where Floyd Mayweather would be able to have or pay out 10% of his purse to, Al Heyman or whatever it is, right? Now, of course, it's Floyd Mayweather Jr. I mean, of course, he's like, listen, hey, it's like I said before. I'm TBE. All these guys, I cook all these guys in the ring. I'm the superstar. I'm the money man, Money Mayweather. So anytime I fight, I get the money. So yeah, you do have something there with Floyd Mayweather, and of course, when he had his deal that was worked out with him and Showtime Network, so Showtime Sports, at the time it was the most lucrative fight deal that was out there. So all of those fights that he had, whether it's against the two fights against Marcos Maidana, the Canelo fight, the the Robert Ghost Guerrero fight, Mayweather fight, the Pacquiao fight, and Andre Berto. That's basically what they were able to generate a large amount of money. Yeah. Hey Jeff, it's like I said before. I I made the deals. I did what I had to do in the ring. I took care of business, and everybody knows that I'm TBE. All right, so yeah, so you kind of like see there, right? Like all of those little instances where this money kind of left Floyd Mayweather's account. That's crazy. It says also Heyman took great pains to ensure Mayweather remained unaware of these accounts and transactions. This is corroborated by statements from insiders that Heyman only permitted Floyd to see what Heyman wanted them to see and actively hid documentation. In one communication, Heyman directed Morris to send Floyd only the signature pages of contracts or forms with Heyman's handwritten notes and explicitly said, quote, he doesn't want Floyd to see the documents, unquote. Oof. Okay. Wow. All right. All right. Okay. See, that was what they. Here's the other part that was getting me right on this thing. It says Heyman's aversion to leaving the digital trail extended to how he communicated instructions. He often relied on fax transmission and in-person meetings rather than emails. In fact, when a subpoena for Heyman's deposition was served in related litigation, his counsel represented that, quote, Mr. Heyman does not own or operate a computer, unquote, underscoring Heyman's deliberate avoidance of traceable electronic communication. By using faxes and avoiding email, Heyman made it harder to later uncover written evidence of his directives. This old school approach was part of what one associate called working in the Flintstone ages. Yabba dabba do, motherfucker. And it served the purpose of secrecy well. You're like, yo, like, come on, man. Like, only using fax machine. Like, what are you doing? You using like you ain't using a cell phone. You using like rotary phones or something. Do you have like a typewriter in your office? Are you watching TV that has like the not only the antennas, but you got to how you have to not even turn. How you had to do it where you had to use a wrench in order to change the channel. Like, is that what we working with? Man, I don't think so. It like this, like seeing this is like mind blowing to me at times because I'm like, there's no way that people could be working in this. What do you call it? This 2026 supposedly, right? That you are working with like no computers, you ain't using no emails or none of that type of stuff. Nah, I can't. I just can't. Not even like even within your whole team, I can't. Nah, I couldn't do it. Right. You see like a couple of other things there where you see that when it comes to Al Heyman. Now it also talks about the thing there with Showtime and Stephen Espinoza, who is the head of Showtime Sports. Now it talks about that Mayweather Pacquiao fight in May of 2015. You know, it was like a production. Of course, it was Showtime with Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao with HBO, right? But it says here, instead of paying Mayweather directly or into an account under Mayweather's sole control, Showtime, at the direction or request of Heyman/Ellerby at the time. Wait a minute. But first, you do have named Showtime's networks and Steven Espinoza, like actually named. But in this description, you do have Jeff Morris, you have Al Heyman, and now you see Leonard Ellerby in this. So, they all may be involved in this whole lawsuit. That's another thing, right? All right, so we talk about this thing here with the Mayweather fight, right? It says Showtime wired Mayweather's share of fight proceeds to the first security bank account of Mayweather's quote unquote tax counsel, which is Jeff Morris. For instance, in the Pacquiao fight, the distribution agreement designated that Mayweather's purse and upside will be paid to an account at First Security Bank of Nevada in the name of Jeff Morris, with Morris as signatory. Showtime complied with that direction. By doing so, Showtime effectively delivered Mayweather's money straight into Heyman's hands, since Heyman controlled Jeff Morris's actions. Now, we pause that right there because you're talking about the most lucrative fight in boxing history. Again, the most lucrative fight in boxing history. And you mean to tell me, now remember, that was over 10 years ago. The most lucrative fight in boxing history. And you're telling me that the purse for that particular fight didn't directly go to you, but it went to not even to the thing there with your manager or advisor. It went to pretty much a completely different account that you have no control over. That's why this is kind of like really mind blowing to me, because you're dealing with this amount of money. Like I said, within the lawsuit, $340 million at minimum. And you talk about the amount of money that was made for that particular fight between Mayweather and Pacquiao. And you're saying that you didn't really see any of that money? That's wild. Okay. And they say that Showtime complied with that direction and effectively delivered Mayweather's money, like I said, straight to Heyman's hands. And that should have raised flags within Showtime. On information and belief, Stephen Espinoza and other Showtime's executives were aware that Al Heyman was the de facto controller behind these accounts. He publicly acknowledged that Heyman often stayed in the background and let others, like the lawyers and promoters, formally handle business, a pattern dating back to Heyman's concert business days. So, like, Heyman was like doing this as, the guy that was managing the music and everything like that. So, like, but this is the thing. They knew that by sending funds to Jeff Morris's account, they were not only participating in a structure that kept Mayweather from directly receiving or overseeing his own earnings. Again, this is Mayweather versus Pacquiao, the biggest fight in boxing. Like, you know what I mean? Hey, this right here. Hey, shout out to Jeff. Didn't Floyd show a $100 million physical check after a fight? That was public. when he showed that. So my thing is, okay, what did that $100 million check kind of show? Was it the base purse? I don't know. But either way, you're saying that Showtime gave out a check towards an account that you didn't have any, involvement with. So where was that, or what was that? Because either you showing that $100 million check, then what that could have been what your upfront purse. So are you saying that this other money was money that was coming from the pay per view earnings or anything like that? Now, if it's like that, hey, you might have something, because there's been some little talk around boxing circles that this ain't the first time that it's happened when it came to pay per view backing like fees. So that's a whole big story behind it, because I've heard of some fighters that kind of brought that to the attention of people that, hey, they ain't really got everything that they're supposed to get. So, but that's like a whole different story on that front. Let's see. Here was the other thing. Mayweather's distribution partner Showtime had contractual duties to provide an accounting of event revenues and expenses. However, when Mayweather's new management team, led by Richard Schaefer, who's kind of dealt with all parties involved for some time, in late 2024, requested detailed breakdowns for the Pacquiao and McGregor fights, Showtime was unable or unwilling to produce them. And correspondent to Showtime or Paramount's finance personnel, another couple of people that may be included in this lawsuit as they show the names there, Schaefer itemized serious discrepancies like expense reimbursements charged against a Pacquiao fight totaling millions of dollars that appeared inflated or unsupported, and a mysterious $20 million reimbursement for the Andre Berto fight that was paid out of the Pacquiao fight funds. So instead of getting paid $20 million straight up for the Berto fight, they're claiming that the $20 million came from the money that they were supposed to get out of that Mayweather Pacquiao fight. That is wild, right? Okay, here's the other thing too, right? What does it say here? Rather than provide transparency, Showtime's response was that many records were not readily available. Heyman claimed that certain documents were, quote, lost due to a flood in a storage facility, while Showtime claimed the records had been moved off-site when Showtime Sports was downsized. Whether or not this was true, the effect was to Stonewall Mayweather's attempts to follow the money trail. Like, come on, man. I ain't gonna be going through the whole track there. That's kind of like most of the stuff that is within the detailed lawsuit. There are 25 total pages. There is going to be a trial scheduled for this, but yeah, something of that magnitude, especially when it's involving the biggest fight in boxing. That's like absolutely insane. And for it to, kind of like go this long, like I said, it's been over 10 years since that fight, you know. But as I said, that kind of like was how some things have been worked out when it comes to these fights, is that you could have it to where, yeah, you get a certain amount of money up front, but when it came to the pay-per-view, uh either pay-per-view proceeds, the profits, or anytime that the fight gets rebroadcast or anything, you get a portion of that. That makes things to where you get money years and years after the actual fight took place. So it is kind of interesting, right? Oh, okay. All right. So yeah. So that check was for the McGregor fight, Mayweather Promotions. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and there, Mayweather Promotions, right? That's another thing that you kind of like seen, or people have heard in reference to Al Heyman when he deals with a lot of fighters, is that you kind of see. those fighters have something where they establish a promotional company and have it be incorporated and all of that, so that they use their own funds to cover the promoter fees or whatever it is, right? So that by the time you do have the fight, you don't necessarily have to pay that percentage off to a promoter, because you're the one that's putting up the fees. Like if I'm a promoter and I'm doing an event or a fight card or whatever it is or something like that, then yeah, you know what? I kind of like cover the cost for myself. Now may or may not cover the cost for the other fighters on the card, but I cover the cost for myself. I'm the one that could probably like put in the money to book or secure the venue, do other things in reference to marketing and advertising. But once all of that stuff is done and I have my fight, all of those profits, whatever happens in sales for ticket sales, vendor or merchandise, um, food and all that stuff, if I get a percentage off for the food or whatever, I'm the one that gets it, not the promoter, or if it was like another promoter that's doing it. So you can have those deals where, hey, if I set up a whole thing with a promotional company and I'm able to, put money up front in order to, book a venue or whatever it is, then I get most of the proceeds back. It's not, I don't have to pay 30% to the promoter or 20% or anything like that. I'm taking that out of I'm taking that, from myself basically. So you see like a check like that for like 100 million. Yeah, you get 100 million because you don't have to pay 10 million or 20 million off to your promoter or anything like that. You don't have to do that. So you've seen that from a lot of these other fighters that had been working with Al Heyman. That's why you've seen as you see a Mayweather Promotions or like a Lions Only Promotions or a Man Down Promotions or something like that. They even would try to do. They were doing that with Terrence Crawford with that one off. He had something where he would have been, he would be able to get more, from the deal. Even though he was a free agent still at the end of the day, but they kind of like say like, hey, this is what we got here for you, to where you don't necessarily have to have a higher percentage of your purse taken out to a promoter if you're the one that's going to just put the money in up front. So they kind of like have that worked out with a number of fighters. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it does not. But hey, in this particular lawsuit joint, man, that's they say yeah, the pack fight too. Hey, so they said yeah, they posted a check for the pack fight. So again, like the thing with that, like I was saying, if you have it to the point where you do like what I would say, have a fight and it's under your promotional company, then yeah, it would work. So, hey, I'll put it this way, right? I'm gonna share the thing here on the screen for those watching. Right? This kind of shows the thing there when it came to that particular event between Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. You should be able to see it here. It says like MGM Grand Garden Arena, right? But if you see there, it says Commission, Nevada State Athletic Commission, and promoter, it says Bob Arum and Floyd Mayweather. So again, for Manny Pacquiao, he has Bob Arum that's representing him. Floyd Mayweather, though, it's Floyd Mayweather. So you kind of like see it here too, right? Because if you go over the card, if I'm not mistaken, you do see a number of these fighters, like outside of a couple here and there, that are under top rank, like a Vasyl Lomachenko, Jesse Hart. Maybe you see the thing there with like Leo Santa Cruz, that's like off, but maybe like Brad Solomon was, they're under top rank and stuff like that. But still, Floyd Mayweather being there as one of the top or head promoters that says like, hey, he's getting a percentage, or he's getting basically the promoter's fee that he would have paid off to somebody. It's going to him. So that initial check that he's getting, that's all his. That's not anything that like say for example, Manny Pacquiao has to give a percentage off the Bob Arum because he was under contract with Top Rank. You know, so there you go. So yeah, you can have that large sum of money that goes straight to you, initially. But when it comes to the pay per view, you have to, provide the numbers. Showtime will have to provide the numbers. They would have to, show like what the percentage of the pay per view proceeds would go out to the fighters and what percent would go to the networks themselves. So all of that stuff has to be, properly provided to all parties involved. So there's that. I wonder though, maybe Floyd Mayweather could get Bob Arum more Top Rank involved in this lawsuit because it could, have their numbers when it comes to pay per view and the proceeds and all that type of stuff. That would be something that if he would be getting Bob Arum or members of Top Rank involved in that lawsuit to kind of like testify in his behalf. That would be crazy, right? But like I said, the 25-page document there for the lawsuit is available. But yeah, I think it's something where I don't know if it's a settlement could be done or anything like that. But one of the other things that I didn't mention that was on that lawsuit when it came to Stephen Espinoza is that it said, hey, you had Stephen Espinoza there representing Showtime and, of course, president of Showtime Sports. But he also talked about Stephen Espinoza's current involvement with Premier Boxing Champions and Al Heyman and being part of that thing there while they currently are going through what they have there on Amazon Prime currently. Okay. Uh, it said that, and it's crazy because they had the thing there where they mentioned a name Rick Laser on there, saying that Espinoza was hired by Al Heyman to help run the broadcasting deal with Amazon Prime. So it said it went from representing the interests of a broadcast partner to being on Heyman's payroll. That's another key part of that lawsuit. So still a lot to kind of like decipher on that, but it's going to be a really interesting situation here over the next few weeks and when they do actually schedule that thing to go down. So you do have all of that that's happening. All right. But that's, mainly what I wanted to cover on that. Now, what was it that I kind of like said there? I'm not sure if like Jeff was able to like join in here. I might like have a couple more minutes left, but I was able to have a conversation there with G5 Jeff, on his channel earlier today, and we were talking about situation that was going on with the 154-pound division, and of course one of the more talked about fighters in the 154-pound division is Jerome Boots Ennis, right? And we know that Jerome Boots Ennis is currently the WBA interim champion there. Okay. We did have who was a WBA champion in Abbas Barao have his fight against Xander Zayas over in Puerto Rico last weekend, where Xander Zayas won by decision. Okay, so now you have Zayas as the WBA and WBO champion. You do have in the IBF a new champion in Josh Kelly, who won the bout from or defeated Baker Murtazalia last weekend. Folks have been talking about the whole situation there with Josh Kelly, him pretty much being under the rights of sorts to Matchroom Boxing because Matchroom was able to win that purse bid for the Josh Kelly versus Baker Murtazalia fight. So, a number of fans or whatever it is are saying that, hey, listen, it means that, Josh Kelly is going to be fighting Boots next. And I'm saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It just depends on what the agreement is for Matchroom and what is it, Wasserman? I forgot what their actual promotional name is, right? But Josh Kelly is there with Wasserman. What is it, Wasserman Schultz or whatever it is, right? Sauerland, like Sauerland and all that, right? So they are like the actual promoters for Josh Kelly, but with Matchroom winning that bid for the Kelly versus Backroom fight, they have options on Josh Kelly. So they could say, hey, you could go ahead and have this fight with Boots next, or they could see if they could work something where Josh Kelly gets a voluntary defense, and then you have him fighting Boots next. But Boots, of course, is a WBA interim champion. He could exercise that whole thing with the WBA and forcing Xander Zayas to fight him next. So a lot of options out there for Boots Ennis. I think he should go after Xander Zayas, to be honest with you. It's a much bigger fight. I say it's a much bigger fight. But the thing about it is, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, that whole thing with the top rank situation kind of hinders Xander Zayas to a certain extent, because Zayas was kind of like built up as one of those next guys there from Puerto Rico that Top Rank could build up as a star. Of course, they talk about the whole thing with Zayas and his relationship with Felix Tito Trinidad. But one of the more recent examples for Top Rank with the Puerto Rican star was Miguel Cotto. And Miguel Cotto was having those fights, Puerto Rican Day weekend or Puerto Rican Parade weekend, having those fights every year during that time of the year and featuring Miguel Cotto. They could have been doing the same thing here with Xander Zayas, but not necessarily having a network deal here in the U.S. I think that is kind of delaying those whole plans for him. So if you have it to where Boots Ennis kind of like says, hey, I want to be next in line for that WBA title, he would be the one that kind of like holds the keys there for it, because he could, like, for example, he could activate that today. Petition the WBA today. If he's named as the mandatory challenger, they could go into negotiations, right? And then after that, if they can't work out a deal, it could go to purse bid. And then at that time, you will be able to see who has money to back them more. Is it Matchroom or is it Top Rank? Matchroom currently has that deal with DAZN, so DAZN could say, hey, we want to be the ones that, broadcast that fight. So, hey, we could, give you a little bit of extra in order for you to secure that bid. Top Rank, right now, they don't really have anybody that could, tell them, hey, yeah, we will want that fight on our network. They don't have one. So if you have something where, like, for example, if Boots Ennis says, hey, I'm the WBA interim champion, I want to go for that full title, let me go after Xander Zayas next. Hey, there ain't going to be much that he can do with that, and then you would still have that option there with Josh Kelly. So that's the thing about it, So he could go after either one of those champions and still basically hold the keys on that front. You know what I mean? So that's the current situation there at 154. Yeah, you had the whole thing there with Virgil Ortiz Jr. There being the WBC interim champion, but we still got to figure out what's going on with that whole lawsuit that he has with Golden Boy Promotions. We got to get an update on that too. So that's gonna be a more to sort out. It's funny. We got a whole bunch of lawsuits that's floating around here in the sport of boxing, even though we had a whole lot of action within boxing just within 5 weeks. And yet, two of the biggest stories in the sport are in reference to lawsuits, man. It's crazy. It's crazy. But that's mainly what I had. I don't think we have like much action that's coming up here outside of what's on slate for February 21st. Okay. We do have some fights that are going to be taking place on Tuesday through Salida Promotions. They have a fight card in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They do have the Zuffa boxing that's scheduled for February 15th. But outside of that, we have the very busy, like February 21st is a really, really busy weekend in boxing. If you can check out boxing schedules around there, and you'll see like how much or how many events that are like actually posted there for February 21st, and that doesn't even include what's going on within the DMV area. There's actually two cards within the DMV area happening on February 21st, and then you do have the rematch between Clarissa Shields and Franchon Cruz-Dezurn on February 22nd. So that's what you got. All right. But hey, was able to, cover, I guess, top stories or whatever it is here for this weekend. Shout out to everyone that's been able to watch here live, whether it's on YouTube or Rumble. We're gonna, have this thing on podcast form through Spotify. If you haven't done so already, check out the interviews that I had with WBC President Mauricio Suleiman, also with Kingsley eBay there. I do have that conversation for those that, from that Jarrell Miller fight there. You know what I mean? You also have a conversation there with John Scrappy Ramirez there. And also, a few other interviews that you'll be able to check out. I did have some that, were from Matt of Brunch Boxing. He was able to talk with Deontay Wilder and with Derek Chisora as well, right? So we have a number of interviews for y'all to check out here on the Boxing Source YouTube channel. And I will work on getting them on to Rumble so that y'all be able to see it on Rumble as well there. So a lot of content there for you through the Boxing Source there. Yeah, as I mentioned there with the Jeter Promotions card, that's one of the fight cards there that's in the DC area that's going to feature the Professor Mike Fox versus Ray Robinson there. That's in the main event. You also have Derek Scooter Davis that is on that fight card as well. And that doesn't include the one that has the sharpshooter Greg Sharpshooter Outlaw on another fight card there in DC on February 21st. So again, that weekend is going to be one of the busiest weekends in boxing, just like how we had January 31st be a busy weekend. And that didn't even include the Pro Box card that was on January 30th. So that's what you got. But for me, that is it. I will catch y'all with the midweek report scheduled for Wednesday. And I'll see about having more interviews on slate on the YouTube channel here this week. So trying to set that up for y'all. Like I said, hit the like button, hit the share button if y'all watching. And if you can, be on the lookout for this audio form here later for y'all to listen to, on your, your Spotify, whatever it is. And until next time, folks, I'll catch y'all later. Peace out.